up on this week's show, how a PlayStation 1 evacuated an airport.
Classic Sonic is back again.
And we chat to Mark Lemmert about making new Apple II games.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every week with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, you need to check out their brand new King of Fighters, The Ultimate History Book. Pre-orders starting on May the 9th. It is the first officially licensed and fully endorsed book of its type, revealing the entire story behind the game with the help of SNK itself. So you can sign up for the pre-order alerts on their website right now and check out the rest of their retro gaming books at bitmapbooks.com. And with our friends at PCBWay.com. Now, they offer a fully featured custom PCB prototype service with low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and they do services like 3D printing, injection molding, and lots more, and they're massive supporters of the retro community. Get an instant quote for your project right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 324, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to have you joining us for another packed show, taking you on a journey inside the world of classic video games, bringing you up to speed with all the goings-on in the world of retro gaming and tech over the last week. And we will have an incredible guest in the second half of this week's show. And Ravi, of course, on his travels across America. You're in a different place today. Whereabouts are you right now?
I'm currently in Brooklyn. I've just seen the Beastie Boys walking down the street.
Amazing.
The hip-hop legends. Yeah. No, I'm in Brooklyn because I'm reaching the end of my journey, and I've decided to do a few final things in New York after VCF East, which we had this weekend. So I've got a bit of a croaky voice because there was a lot of partying, a lot of drinking with Amiga Bill. He actually lost his voice for the event, so for the first 2 days, it was kind of like a silent Amiga Bill, which that concept's pretty crazy if people know what his streams are like. Amiga Bill silent. Oh, my God.
It was funny because we did our Patrons Hangout last night, and you give us a little tour of VCF that was really interesting. For those that don't know, VCF East you were at, weren't you? It's like a massive retro computing conference. It happens every year. There's two of them in America, actually, I think, isn't there? Yeah. Everyone was asking, where's Amiga Bill? And what happened to his voice? And they're like, he's been out partying with Ravi. That explains it.
Well, it was really awesome. It was a great event, and it was held on this kind of military army base, and they had like different sections, so it was really spread out. But man, I got some really good stuff there. I got a Magnavox Odyssey 2, which I don't think I've ever seen one in the UK. I got that boxed and had to chuckle my clothes out my bag and, prioritize, get the Magnavox in there.
Amazing.
But it was an amazing event. There was some really cool stuff that you're never going to see in Europe or the UK. And, it was like any of these retro events. You just have people with lots of passion. I had lots of listeners come up and say hi, which was amazing. So it was really good fun. Rebecca Berger was there as well. They also had a lot of the Commodore team all around. And hopefully, like Dan said, we're going to run some of these Commodore talks that they had.
But yeah, I mean, it just sounds like you've had the best time in America. I know you've been doing lots of retro game shopping in New York as well. Buying games for Joe, mostly.
Well, don't say that. What if my wife listens?
I've been taking pictures and Joe's just like, my wife's going to kill me, but get it.
Yeah, there was a couple which would have meant remortgaging the house. So I said no to them. But
you considered it, though.
I did consider it. There was some really, really interesting Genesis games that you've been spotting, haven't you? And I said, keep an eye out for a couple of these ones, thinking you wouldn't find them, and you're like, yep, got this one, got that one, get this one. I was like, wow.
Your daughter doesn't need to go to university.
Exactly. She doesn't need a roof over her head.
Or food.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ravi's final week in America. She's going to be back in the studio again next week, but hopefully we'll bring you some of those talks from VCF East in future episodes of the show. Now, while Ravi's been on his travels, Joe and I have been, keeping the show going here, doing interviews as well, and actually, we're going to be talking to someone really interesting this week. We did an interview with a chap called Mark Lemmert. Now, he's actually making new games for the Apple II.
Yeah, so he made a game about a year ago now called Nox Archaist, which is a really, really interesting RPG And it's like, I say it a lot, but it's like one of these like mind-blowing games that they have running on old systems. Do you know what I mean? Where it just looks like pushes the boundaries of that system. It just looks like it shouldn't be running on it. And it's just a really, really detailed, in-depth RPG. And it's got that real Dungeons and Dragons feel, which, you know, we always kind of come up in these kind of conversations with these kind of people. But he's recently released a book, or he's writing a book, which is about essentially the making of the game as well. And, you know, because it was a big success. And, you know, not only was it on the Apple II, you can play it on modern PCs as well. It's on Steam, and so, which is really cool. And it was a good success. So he's released this book all about, you know, the making of it as well. And it's just, a lot of it was over my head. I'm not going to lie, you know, kind of like getting things to run on the Apple II and stuff like that. But it was really, really interesting, and then really interesting to kind of like hear the history of the game and stuff. And, you know, if you're into like fantasy, you know, if you're really into your computers and really into fantasy, then this is right up your street. It was really interesting.
I remember when it came out, there was like a lot of really high reaction from it, because we've had so many guests on the podcast that have talked about the Apple II being their kind of roots of gaming and their first entry. And even Steve Wozniak, you know, the creator of the original Apple, praised this game. And, you know, there's a lot of interest about it. It's really seems like a cool thing. And I kind of love the idea of releasing a backstage book and looking behind what's going on.
Well, this game's had a really long journey. I mean, he originally kind of came up with the concept of it back in the late 90s, but it was something he couldn't make happen back then. He kind of obviously moved on with his life, rediscovered the Apple II again in recent years, actually finally got this game made, but with the help of some, you know, really high-profile people. Like Richard Garriott was involved in this and giving advice. And you mentioned Rebecca Heinemann, who was at VCFE. She helped with this too, and Steve Wozniak's endorsed it. So, I mean, you know, you couldn't really get a bigger list of Apple II legends, could you, to endorse your game. So it's really interesting chat, actually. And we chat about, you know, when he used to run his own bulletin board system and ISP and all that kind of thing as well. So really interesting chat with Mark Lemmert. He's coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, before then, lots of news stories, as always, to get into. And this was one that I think Joe messaged the minute the news dropped the other day. He's like, oh my God, new Sonic game coming up. We need to talk about this. It's actually a collection of remastered Sonic games with some nice improvements as well. And this is a collection called Sonic Origins.
Yeah, so I love it. It's new Sonic, it's new old Sonic kind of thing. Like, again, once again. So yeah, Sonic Origins remaster of the original. I was going to say 3 games, but essentially 5 games. So we're getting it on June 23rd, which is Sonic's official birthday. It will be his 31st birthday. He's getting on now. He's in his 30s.
Yeah,
he's not, you know, he's still young. Like he is still young.
He hasn't
31.
got the beer belly.
He's not got the beer belly. He's still running, isn't he? So he's still got it. So this is the interesting thing. So we've got Sonic 1, 2, and 3 in this collection. Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic CD, which I think is fantastic, but it's also saying it's got Sonic 3 and Knuckles in there as well, which is what's getting me excited, because obviously you guys know, I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, Sonic and Knuckles had the lock-on technology, where if you plug Sonic 2 into it, you could play Sonic 2 as Knuckles, but it didn't change like the story or anything like that. It was just Knuckles on those levels. But then Sonic 3, if you put that into Sonic and Knuckles, you essentially got the full game. Like, you know, I think there was additional levels. I can't remember the actual ins and outs of it, but you got essentially the whole of Sonic 3 as Knuckles and the whole of Sonic and Knuckles, and there was loads more levels, and you got the real ending of the game and everything. And that version isn't on any of the remasters. You know how we got them on like the Sega Saturn and the GameCube, and
there was Sonic Jam, wasn't there, which was kind of like a little filler, but it had extra features like Spin Dash and like stuff like that.
Yeah, none of those compilations had that Sonic 3 and Knuckles, whereas this version looks as though it does, which is really exciting me. We actually spoke about it years and years and years ago on the show. We were talking about hacked Sonic games, and one of the hacks, like, you know, like a ROM you could play, was a ROM of that version of the game where you got the full Sonic 3 and Knuckles experience. So it's really cool that they're bringing that to, you know, modern consoles. So it's coming out on everything: PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox X and S, Switch, Steam. Everything's getting it. Epic Games, which is really, really cool. 23rd of June. But they've also added a lot of like Ravi just said, a lot of quality of life kind of things into the game. So they've upscaled all the graphics, so they look really nice. You know, the full remasters like Sonic Mania that we got in 2018, which is really cool. But you can also play it in the classic like 16:9, or you can play it in widescreen as well.
I think that's so important because like, you know, a lot of games when they go into widescreen, they're very different. It's a different experience. Having that kind of, you know, old aspect ratio, but with the improvements is a real like look at detail, you know. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, and there's all different soundtracks in there and stuff as well. But like, you're going to be able to play it with the Mega Drive soundtrack as well, which is really cool. Or you can have like the updated soundtrack, and also you can actually play as Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles in any of the games. So if you want to play Sonic 1 as Knuckles, or if you want to play him as Tails, you can do that. Or if you want to play as Tails and Sonic and Knuckles, you can do that. You just switch between them, which I think is really awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then
my main question is, can you go from 50 to 60 hertz? So like the soundtrack speeding up a little bit.
Oh, I don't know about that. That's a good question. I don't work for them. I sound like I work for them right now, but I don't know about that one. But
you know, you're talking about the playable characters there. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter unhappy that you can't play Amy though, because she features in a lot of the cutscenes.
Yeah, she's all over the artwork, and they've actually also. I don't know where they're going with this, but they've done like a whole animation with it as well, and that's one of the things that's kind of been like as a selling point for the game, that there's a whole new like animation through the whole like game. So I'm assuming you know, throughout the game there's going to be animated clips to kind of connect a story together, perhaps. And Amy is in all these clips, and she's in the story and stuff. So, but like you say, you can't play as her. So I don't know if it's going to be a case of like they're going through the old games, they've gone back in time to save her or something like that. You know, that's just me speculating. But
I wonder what comes with it as well, because like I remember they had was it Generations, or it was the one on the Switch, and they had like a drive with a ring and stuff that came in it. Here it says Digital Deluxe Edition adds exclusive music and cosmetics. So
well, let me tell you one thing that I've been seeing. This is the main criticism of this collection that I've seen, and people have been kind of ripping it on Twitter because of this. Now, they've actually released a chart. There's like a spreadsheet that details all the different kind of DLC you get with each different edition. By the looks of it, there's like, 5 different editions?
So
and people,
the standard edition.
Some people on Twitter are like, I missed the day that you could buy a video game and didn't need an Excel spreadsheet to figure out what was it.
That is great. There's standard edition, Start Dash Pack, Premium Fun Pack, Classic Music Pack, Digital Deluxe Edition. They've only at the moment Standard Edition and Digital Deluxe are the only ones actually available. And one's going to be £30 and one's going to be £40, or I think it's like $35 and $45. But you are right, it is on like an Excel spreadsheet, and it even looks like one on the official like website. But essentially, by the looks of things, you get like bonus coins, which are essentially bonus rings, not coins, sorry, that unlock content within the game. So I imagine if you get the Digital Deluxe Edition, you can instantly unlock the likes of Knuckles to play on any level, I'm assuming. Do you know what I mean? You can buy that extra content and stuff like that. But one of the other criticisms I've seen is they're trying to say it's like the ultimate retro kind of Sonic pack, and people are a little bit like, where's Sonic Spinball? And where is Knuckles Chaotix, the 32X game?
Yeah.
You know, hopefully they're in there as like unlockables or something. That would be really, really cool. But I feel like that would be a selling point if they were, you know, they'd announce that if they were on there as well.
You know what, though, as well? I mean, the pricing of it is... I've bought these games. So many. I mean, probably every console I've bought for the last 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
Has got, you know, at least Sonic 1 and 2 on there.
Oh, yeah.
And like... You know, if you're talking to me, like the best Sonic collection I probably own is the Mega Collection for the GameCube. Which I think is like, 12, 13 games on that? That's like, you know,
you get all the Game Gear ones and stuff on it, don't you?
Yeah, which this is not as fully featured as that. And I do think it is kind of crazy that there's so many, like 5 different editions. That does seem a little bit overkill. And it retails for, I think the standard edition is always £33 and $40.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
£37 for the Digital Deluxe Edition, which, I mean, to me, does sound... I mean, I know these games have had a lot of love and treatment, and you've got stuff, if you get the Deluxe Edition, you get extra missions, exclusive music,
you get
cosmetics.
An exclusive difficult mode or something on it.
Yeah, but it feels like
you're
mega
fanboys, isn't it?
But you're paying like AAA price for games that I've bought so many times. To me, that is kind of, it feels a bit of a hard
I think
sell.
you're out of the what's the word I'm looking for? You're not with the kids now, mate. That's not AAA game prices. AAA game prices these days.
Well, yeah, 80, 90 quid.
If it was like Another World, the definitive edition, you would just go for it straight away, wouldn't you?
I'm going to buy this anyway. Come on, let's not kid ourselves. But it's it does just feel a bit like seeing a price approaching 40 quid to buy Sonic 1 and 2 again.
I've bought Sonic CDs,
but it's all nice and it's all remastered and nice, Dan.
again.
Yeah,
but it is cool to get a collection of them, and I think it is nice that they've not just dumped them on there. As downloadables like they have on so many previous systems, getting those refreshed visuals and stuff. I think it's obviously got a bit of love in there. So, and particularly for people that haven't bought it, 2,000 times like I have, I imagine it's probably more enticing. But if you're a Sonic fan, you want to play it on your modern console again, and that comes out in June. And we'll link up the article and the trailer in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, maybe you listen to this podcast each week, and as we do, because we've done so many episodes of this show, you're like, who was on episode? Have we had this guest on before? Did we cover this in the news? Wouldn't it be handy to have a database of the Retro Hour podcast that you could search of all our back episodes?
Oh, yes. And nothing's more handy than having it on a C64, which is absolutely amazing. So there's a listener, long-time listener and friend of the show, Hags Lab.
And patron, I believe.
And patron, check him out on YouTube, because he's actually going around and he's like developing a lot of C64 programs. He's showing you behind the scenes stuff, but he's actually gone off on his own. We didn't request this or anything. He's just like, I'm going to make an episode guide for the Retro Hour for the C64. And this is absolutely insane. You know a lot more about C64 than me, don't you, Dan? So kind of let us know about this.
Well, first of all, I'll link the video up, and it's around a 20-minute video. It kind of talks through the whole making of it and everything too. And there's also a link if you want to download it off his website. This is a Hags Lab on YouTube. And what he's done, essentially, he's put all of our back episodes, he's took all the data off, all our show notes, and he's put it in a searchable database that you can load up on your original Commodore 64. And there's some really cool stuff in there. Like he's remade the Retro Hour logo in Petsky graphics. So
which is quite hard to do, isn't it? Petsky.
I think that looks incredible how well he's done that. I ever thought, when I saw that, I thought, if we ever launch our own bulletin board, we need to use that as like the intro logo.
There's a plan.
But everything's in here, so you can go in. It shows you the there's versions of the database that you can update. As new episodes come out, there's you can press the function keys on your keyboard, find out about the show, find out about us guys as well. Stuff you stuck off our website.
Can select like a random episode as well.
Yeah. Or
you can search for them, which is pretty awesome. And it seems like he said he's written it in C using the CC65 cross compiler, and it's a PRG file.
Yeah. PRG files are like what you load on SD cards for the Commodore 64. Okay. A lot of the games are kind of in that format. But for example, say you want to see when we had LGR on the show, you just press F5 and then press on the search and you type in LGR, and it shows you all the times that he's been on the Retro Hour and which episodes. You can, episode lookup feature on there as well. So it's just the fact that, like you said, someone's actually took the time and effort to do this for our little show, I think is just really humbling. And, just what an honor to have us guys on a Commodore 64, I think is cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like useless because you can't listen to the episodes and stuff, but it is the coolest thing ever. Yeah. It's like if you want to get like the ultimate old school experience, then check us out on the C64.
I love in the comments he's put an Easter egg in this one, figure out how to do it. And I'd love it if the Easter egg was just like a digitalized 8-bit version of Ravi just comes up on screen or something, like with his thumbs up or something.
Singing Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So, if you want to, no one's found the Easter egg as yet. At the time of recording this, he only released this yesterday. So if you want to download the Commodore 64 episode guide of the Retro Hour, I'll put a link to that in our show notes as well. And first person to find the Easter egg is the best. How's that sound?
There we go. I like that. It's the best.
So I'll put that in our show notes, and a massive thank you to Hags Lab for making that just really, really cool, I think. Now, something else we're really hyped for as well, and I know you're keeping a very keen eye on the developments of this, Joe. This is Turtles Shredder's Revenge, the brand new Turtles game that is coming out this summer. Obviously kind of in the style of the classic arcade games from back in the day. But the more we see about this, I don't know about you, the more excited I am to get my hands on this game.
Yeah, man, this looks really cool. We've not spoke about this in a while, but we have spoke about it. So it's interesting because we're getting 2 Turtles games this year. So we're getting this one, Shredder's Revenge, which is essentially the sequel to the beat 'em ups, that from the early 90s, late 80s, the from Turtles the arcade game, Hyperstone Heist, Turtles in Time. It's kind of the sequel to them, which is really, really cool. And then there's also the Konami Cowabunga collection, which is a remaster of all the originals coming out as well. So this is actually coming from the publisher .mu, who we've had those guys on before because they did the Streets of Rage 4 game as well.
Yeah, they're on it, aren't they?
They're
we
really
need to
on
get them back on the show.
We do need to get them back on the show to talk about this. But what I really love about this, and this is why it's in the news this week, is they've actually got the original cast of characters to voice the characters,
nice.
Which I think is really cool. So unfortunately, not all of them are with us anymore. A couple of them have passed away. At the end of the day, it's a 35-year-old TV show, and but
don't make me feel old.
I know. I'm sorry, but we are getting the original Turtles voice cast. So we're getting Cam Clark as Leonardo, Townsend Coleman as Michelangelo, Barry Gordon as Donatello, and Rob Paulson as Raphael. So the original Turtles are back, which I think is really, really awesome that they've managed to do that, because they're not the biggest studio, .mu, but I think that's so awesome that they've managed to do that, and they've got the rights for it because of, I don't know how the development of this one's happened, but with the Streets of Rage one, they just kind of asked Sega, can we do this? And, they got the okay. So I imagine a similar kind of situation with Shredder's Revenge has happened. But
you remember in the original games, you got a lot of the just kind of small sound bites, didn't you, of the characters in there, which is similar. I mean, there's actually like a trailer you can watch, 11 minutes of gameplay that I put in our show notes as well. And this looks incredible. Now I'm going to play you just a little clip, and you can hear it's kind of very much in the vein of the original. Listen to the music and listen to just the character sound drops that are in here. This is going to take you back 30 years.
Dynamite strike!
I could be in an arcade in 1990 hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I wasn't that familiar with the arcade, but I was with the TV show. So like seeing like Rocksteady and Bebop and kind of, like those characters, and I'm just like, wow, this is cool. So kind of maybe people who haven't been into the arcade that much, but did experience like, Turtle Mania back in the days. Yeah, this looks like a good addition. I must say, April O'Neil's hair looks huge.
The 80s hair, Ravi. That's what
80s hair. You know what I would have really
some hairspray or something.
You know what I would have loved if they did what they did with Streets of Rage, where they set it, 30 years later. So the characters were all like, they're all in like their 50s and stuff in Streets of Rage, and then there's like a few younger characters you can play as. I think it would have been quite funny if they did the whole, teenage mutant. Well, it wouldn't be teenage; it'd be like middle-aged mutant Ninja Turtles.
45-year-old Turtles.
Yeah, I think that would have been funny. But it does look it's set like immediately after, the original kind of Turtles and stuff, which is really cool.
Timeless, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it transports you back. I mean, it feels like a turn of the 90s kind of game. The soundtrack and everything as well, and the gameplay. I mean, I was a huge fan of the original arcade. I mean, the amount of summer holidays we'd go to the seaside, and my brother and I just pound my dad's money into that machine. It was just, and the fact that it was 4 players as well. You could get all your mates on it. It was such a good game.
Absolutely.
I'm really, really hyped for this. So as we get closer to release, I'm sure we'll hear more details, and we'll try and get the guys back on to tell us a bit more about the development of it as well. That'd be interesting, I think. Now, lots of other news stories to get through. We need to talk about the Vectrex Mini and how the PlayStation 1 forced the evacuation of an airport in just a minute. Before we do that, though, let's take a little pause to give a big thank you to our incredible supporters. Now, these are the people who are the lifeblood of the Retro Hour podcast. These are our fabulous patrons.
Oh, God, 100%. And, I don't want to get too deep because I say this every time I end up talking about the patrons, but it is so true. Bottom line is, the truth is, if it wasn't for our patrons, the show wouldn't be here anymore with everything that happened over the last kind of 2 years and stuff like that. So we are forever thankful and grateful for it.
And becoming a patron, you get like a load of bonuses. We're actually about to record the Retro Hours After Hours, and that's a podcast where we've got, how many episodes is it now, Dan?
22, I think we have in the bag. It's like 2
geez.
years worth.
2 years worth of episodes. So if you become a patron, you can get exclusive access to our RSS feed, and straight away all those episodes appear. And also you get the podcast early, ad-free as well. And this week we're going to be talking about 2005.
Yeah, we're going to be going back on because we do this on the After Hours podcast, which is for our gold members and above. We do it every single month, a full podcast just for our patrons, and kind of alternate episodes we do kind of reminiscing on a certain year in gaming. So we thought we'd do 2005. I mean, God, what a year. You know, the launch of the 360 came out in that year, Xbox 360. We also got the announcement of the Wii, or Project Revolution, I think it was called, when it was announced at E3 in 2005. The PlayStation 3 as well was announced there, so it was on that cusp of going from, you know, the PS2, original Xbox, into the next generation, so really exciting time for gaming and technology as well, so I'm looking forward to that. So now's a very good time to join us on Patreon, because this weekend you'll get access to that, and also we do our Patrons Hangout as well. I mean, in the most recent one, Ravi gave us a little tour of VCF that was really cool, actually, and you can join us for the one that's coming up in a few weeks' time. We'd love to see you on the May Patrons Hangout. So really, the main reason that we have a Patreon, though, is just to make sure that we can cover the running costs of doing this show for you each and every week, so where it really does make a massive difference to us. And of course, for backing us on Patreon, you will get a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, and that is
Hall of Fame.
The Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Just one new patron to give a massive shout out to this week. Big thank you, Giles Jones, for supporting us on Patreon. We hugely appreciate it. And if you'd like to join him and also get a mention just after Ravi's beautiful singing in the Hall of Fame, you can join us right now at theretrohour.com. That sounds epic, that, doesn't it? Don't you think?
It's the only time my singing's been repeated. I remember singing in church, and the rows would clear around me as people tried to escape.
Well, I haven't checked the listener stats for the last couple of weeks. If everyone turns off around this time during the show, then might have to knock it on the head. Yeah, but yeah, thanks so much, Giles. Right then, we're going to talk about the PlayStation evacuating an airport in a minute. Before we do, though, you must have been excited about this news, Ravi. I know the Vectrex is kind of your dream system. You still haven't got your hands on one, even though you've been saying you will for 7-8 years now. But this could be one that's achievable for you. A Vectrex Mini.
It seems like it would be more fun. I haven't got a Vectrex because they're a nightmare to repair. They're hard to maintain, and you've got a huge kind of CRT in there and stuff, and it's older than me, so having something on like new hardware is really good. And we've seen a lot of these kind of little minis be created, and people doing them at home, and this one seems really impressive. So it's done with a Arduino Pro microboard that's being used for the joystick, and it's got a little separate joystick unit as you have in the Vectrex. Now, I think the joystick is probably the most impressive part of this. So I've seen Vectrex emulators before, but he's fully recreated the joystick and got it running on a controller, and those things are quite rare from what I've seen.
I love the fact as well that he's because the Vectrex was very unique, wasn't it? There's only 28 games on the system, but the fact that it used those vector graphics, there's nothing else really like it from that era that I've played before. So in terms of, a unique console experience, and something that I imagine will probably be quite difficult to emulate, but they're saying in this article here that apparently, modern LCDs can perform well enough to emulate the effect. And obviously the original Vectrex was monochrome, so you've got these kind of colour overlays, but actually he's emulated the colour overlays on this little MIDI as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I've had an emulator previously for my Wii U, which was an actual Vectrex one, which is pretty crazy. But he's even using a Raspberry Pi Model B as well. It's a 2, so it doesn't require that much power, to be honest, to run it. But it's in a real nice little form factor. I've always thought maybe he could have used a screen from a mini oscilloscope and gone pretty hardcore, but yeah, this is pretty impressive, and it's absolutely tiny. It's got this little 2.5 inch LCD on there.
Vectrex games as well, they're all kind of portrait, weren't they? Because the screen was upright,
yeah, so it's flipped,
which gives them a unique way of playing them. It's a system again. I mean, I know we've done episodes about it before. I'm the same as you, Ravi. I've kind of looked at them and I've seen ones on eBay that, I mean, the price is going up all the time, but I've seen some that are kind of, non-working or needs repair, and they're kind of selling them for like 100 quid. And I'm like, oh, shit, I'm like, oh my God, way beyond my technical skills. Building something like this is also way beyond my technical skills. Just getting that out there.
I was just looking, just looking at the controller part. Like the other ones is just a screen put in a like 3D case, which a lot of people do. But he's also done the software side. But the controller part, he's done a custom case for the controller. He's done a custom board, and like that is majorly impressive. And and I love how the controller's mini as well. It's a really nice idea.
And if you want to see how small it is, it's actually banana for scale in the thumbnail too. So it's on a YouTube channel called Retro Game On, chap called Brendan who's made this. It looks really good. And again, I mean, it just blows me away kind of how, ingenious some of these kind of fan projects are. That looks awesome. So if you want to check that out, that video will be in the show notes.
It doesn't seem to have any batteries in there, but I guess you could probably run it off like a separate battery pack because it's micro USB powered, like just a Raspberry Pi, really.
Yeah, give him like maybe a hardcore phone charge pack or something. Could run that.
Yeah, something external like that.
Yeah. So maybe something to take on the plane, Ravi, on the way back. Something not to take to the airport, though. A PlayStation 1. Because apparently a PS1 has forced the evacuation of Boston's Logan International Airport. How has this happened then?
So this happened earlier this week, only a couple of days ago. And essentially, a passenger was going through security, and the X-ray machine, they had a PlayStation in their bag, and it went through the X-ray machine, and apparently the suspicious item warranted them enough suspicion to call in the bomb squad to dispose of the item. Now, some reports are saying it just says it's a PlayStation, so they don't know whether it's a PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5. But then some reports are saying it was a PlayStation 1. It was an original PlayStation, not the PS1, the little one, the original PlayStation.
So but apparently, this must have been in hand luggage then.
So it was in hand luggage, yeah. So it was in the person's hand luggage.
Carry on.
But apparently, the reason it was suspicious and it set off like the warnings on the X-ray machine was it was in a degraded state. Apparently, it was like rotting away, and there was particles in the X-ray machine which seemed suspicious from the so that says to me it was an original PlayStation, which is obviously like, I don't know, rusting away. Some of the components might be rusting away in it or something. But that begs the question: why does this guy have it in his hand luggage? Was it you, Ravi? Have you been buying retro systems and putting them in your hand luggage while you're on your travels?
I've been doing 25 hours of flying, and the TSA are pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
This is my tip. Don't wear a button-up fly to America, or you're going to get that area inspected quite a lot. And they need witnesses and stuff. Yeah.
Don't shove a PlayStation 1 down your trousers either. But,
I transported a Dragon 32 to America, and I'm taking back a Magnavox Odyssey. And the key to transporting these things is have the original box. If you've got the original box, they can see what it is and they know what it is straight away. And they're like, cool, retro. But if you've got like wires and weird shapes and stuff like that, and especially if you've got it on your carry-on, I think that's a bit crazy, just carrying on a degraded old console.
Well, apparently, the spokesperson for the airports explained it was in poor condition as well. And because of the condition of it, it raised concerns. So I maybe they knew it was a PlayStation, but it looked like it had been ripped apart and something put in it. Maybe
a lot of travellers were heading to PAX East as well, which is a gaming convention and trade show. So maybe he was on there to sell it, or maybe restore it, or get it actually repaired.
Yeah, maybe. Or it could just be miscommunication, and it was like a PS4 or PS5, and he was taking it with him to play, while he was in his hotel room wherever he got to or whatever. So
I think that's
funny
crazy though,
situation.
calling the bomb squad though. I think that's well, you've got to be cautious these days.
There's a rusty PlayStation over there. We need to dispose of it.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing though, a lot of these old consoles, I mean, particularly like, if you get capacitor leak and all that kind of thing, I imagine like, acids are leaking out of it and that kind of stuff.
And I assume now you've said that's probably the abnormal, can't say it.
Abnormality. Maybe it was chipped as well. That might have caused some issue with bad chipping job. Yeah,
got done for piracy, flying on a plane. Yeah, so just a little warning: if you are doing some travelling with your retro systems this summer, you might want to put them in the hold, not in your hand luggage. Just saying,
or at least have a box or a manual.
Now, we're going to be chatting to our special guest, Mark Lemmert, in just a moment, talking about making new Apple II games. Before we do that, just a moment to give a massive thank you to this week's sponsor, and that is our wonderful friends at Harry's. Now, you might know about Harry's. We've talked about them a lot on the show. We're big fans of Harry's, but they're actually more than just a super sharp razor company. In fact, Harry's want to revamp your entire routine, from close shaves to flake-free hair, all the way to clear, healthy skin. Harry's is on a mission to help guys feel good. Now, obviously, we're all kind of traveling at the moment. If you've maybe seen pictures of Ravi, you're thinking, oh, his skin's looking nice at the moment. Or maybe you saw Joe at the Doncaster Gaming Market thinking, Joe's looking fresh. That's all thanks to Harry's, isn't it, guys?
It is, absolutely. I like that as well. That was a good angle there. I didn't know we are good looking, and it is thanks to Harry's.
And modest, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we want you, if you are going away this summer, maybe you're off on holiday soon, we want to give you a free travel-sized shower gel with a trial set and try out the other products as well as a shave as well. So in their trial set, you get an expertly engineered weighted handle, you get their 5-blade cartridge that's actually made by artisans in their own German factory, complete with a precision trimmer, you get the handy foaming shave gel for effective lubrication, a travel blade cover for your adventures this summer, and a free shower gel just for Retro Hour listeners as well. And obviously, if you take up these offers, you're really helping out the podcast as well. So show our sponsors a bit of love and take up this offer. All you got to do to get your shower, shave and go kit is redeem your free Harry's trial set right now by covering the £3.95 delivery and using our exclusive link. So that's harrys.com/retro. harrys.com/retro to get your set delivered and start your shave plan, and your freebie will be added at checkout. And a massive thank you to our friends at Harry's for their continued support of our show. Right, next time we're going to be talking about making new RPG games for the Apple II with our special guest, Mark Lemmert. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the main event when we welcome on our very special guest. And I must admit, I'm very excited to learn something from the interview this week, because the Apple II is such a legendary machine, particularly with developers who come on the podcast from the US, and it was a huge machine there, and at role-playing games as well, obviously a massive genre. So today we're going to be joined by Mark Lemmert talking about this incredible new game, a role-playing game for the Apple II, and a publisher of a book on the subject as well. The game is called Nox Archaist, so we'll find out more about that soon. But let's welcome Mark onto the show. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. And really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Like I said, it looks fascinating that a new Apple II RPG game is out. So I look forward to learning a bit about the development of that. But it's always kind of nice to find out our guests' geek credentials, if you like, and kind of go back to day one. I mean, what was it that originally got you into video games? And do you remember your first ever gaming experience?
Boy, I was like 5 years old, and I'm dating myself here, but this is going to be the early 1980s. And my family bought a Apple II Plus computer, top of the line at the time. It was not retro at all, cutting edge. And I remember, my dad and brothers. My brothers are quite a bit older than me, and they were setting it up in the living room. And I have just kind of a vague memory of I think there was a game called Parachute that my brothers started playing, and I was kind of anxious to join in. And then I later remember that these are just little snippets of memories, but I think the next one in sequence is I can remember my brothers playing Ultima 3 and watching them, and I didn't understand the game other than it had something to do with wizards and warriors, and this is the time when the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon was on in Saturday mornings, and which I loved. And so I was just enamored with this game, Ultima 3. And, I would say I was pretty much hooked from that point forward on both video games, particularly role-playing games, and Ultima, even in more particular within that genre.
And what's so special about the Apple II for you? Is it, because it was your first home computer, or, was there something about it that just stuck with you over these years?
I think a lot of it was that it was the computer I grew up on. I worked on played games and learned to program on that computer for easily 10 years before my family got the next computer, a 386 IBM compatible PC. My dad decided to go that direction rather than get a Macintosh. Basically, he was upset that because when Apple released the Mac, they didn't make it backwards compatible with the Apple II, and so all the software that he had paid money for, some of it, I should say, but that he paid money for. This is the golden age of piracy, mind you. But he certainly paid a lot of money for some productivity programs and things, and just never really forgave Apple for that. So instead of the Mac, went the direction of the IBM PC. But getting back to your question, so that was a good solid 10 years that I was immersed in the Apple II computer, which is just like an eternity, these days, to have the same computer. So there's certainly a lot of nostalgia, for the games, that I was playing then in those formative years, as well as learning to program on that platform, and the desire to make my own game. As I was learning to program, I was basically trying to make my own games. That's how I was learning, for the most part. And I never finished anything because as I learned more programming, it was like, oh, I could do this much better. So I would just start over and, apply the new things that I learned. It was a really great process for learning programming. Not so great for actually finishing anything, but that's a discipline that would come later.
Well, you mentioned that you started programming on the machine. I mean, were you doing that from the the manual that came with it, which I know was quite comprehensive on the Apple II, or were you buying magazines? How did you kind of pick it up?
Yeah, well, there was one book in particular. I actually have it on my desk right here, called the Apple II User's Guide, and this I have the original copy that my dad got back in the day, and boy, this thing is almost wearing out because I used it a lot. And I honestly don't remember if this came with the computer or if he bought it separately, but it was a very comprehensive book on the machine in general, and then it went in detail on like AppleSoft basic programming. That was really the main book. There were a couple other books that I remember, being in the house at one point, and my dad had a subscription to a couple different computer magazines. Nibble was one of them, and so yeah, definitely. I would read the columns in the magazines like Nibble and, type in the sample programs they gave and learn things that way, or learn tips and tricks and things that were sometimes put in those magazines. It was definitely a very self-taught process.
So you mentioned that obviously you were playing Ultima and you saw your brothers playing it, and all you knew about it is it had wizards and warriors and stuff like that in it. Were you a fan of fantasy books or D&D?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of my interest got kind of channeled through my brothers because they were older and I would see them doing things, and, they would, have friends over and play Dungeons and Dragons. And, I don't really recall actually being a full-fledged player in any of their games. I was more just the annoying little brother hanging around the table, but picking it up through osmosis. And then I absolutely got into the Lord of the Rings books and was reading those at the time, and then eventually Dragonlance. And so to me, when I saw Ultima 3, it was the computer piece of that broader fantasy world that I was getting immersed in from those other, media forms. So yeah, it just fit like a glove for me.
Yeah, and I think, we've had like Richard Garriott and Rebecca Heineman on the show before, and that, I think everyone we talk to that's kind of involved, particularly in role-playing games, they always say that D&D is like the foundation of it, really. I think that's where it all started, didn't it, really, before it went onto screens?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I've talked to Richard a number of occasions, and I can remember him, specifically saying that, when he was writing, even before Ultima, even before Calibeth, when he was in school, writing the programs like on the card readers that he would call D&D 1, D&D 2, up to I think it was D&D 28 that became a Calibeth. Said that that is literally what he was trying to do, was to recreate the D&D experiences that he was having, in his living room on a computing platform. And so, yeah, that was the holy grail for sure.
Well, obviously those games, RPGs, one of the most complex genres of video games that you could program, particularly, if you're doing it on your own. Did you make any kind of simple games in Apple Basic at first? Because I know a lot of people start with like a, Space Invaders clone or something like that. What kind of games were you trying to make at the beginning?
I for the most part, was trying to make an Ultima-inspired, tile-based graphical RPG style game. That was mostly where my focus was. And as a kid, when I was doing this, I was not making a lot of, I was making a lot of progress in learning programming, but as far as like the results on the screen were nowhere close. And I knew that. And I was frustrated by that, and so I would at times, because it's like, well, I did really want to actually finish a game. There were times that I would kind of dabble off in different directions and like, oh, well, maybe I'll try making an arcade game. Maybe that'll be easier. Or, try making more of like a King's Quest style adventure game, with kind of focused more on portrait screens of graphics and so there are some times that I would kind of go off in different directions, but ultimately all of these directions had their own challenges, which really rooted in, the limits of the machine. The Apple II is a 1 megahertz processor, and the machine that had the most RAM was 128K. Of the 8-bit machine, Apple IIs, I should say, it was 128K was the max. So just microscopic amounts of resources. And so really, what I eventually came to learn as I was doing all this as a kid was that the large commercial games at that time were all made in assembly language. That's what you had to do in order to get the efficiency that you needed, both in terms of CPU and memory, and even disk space, to be able to make a game like that. And oftentimes even, running right on the bare metal, there was not enough room on these 8-bit platforms to even fit an operating system in memory and the game engine. It just was out of the question. You had to kick the operating system out of memory and basically, write some machine language code to bootstrap the computer off of the point where the ROM turns over control. The ROM can basically get the computer turned on, and then it expects other code to take over. And if you don't have an operating system, you got to write your own bootstrap code to basically chunk pieces of the game engine gradually into memory, and then do everything yourself because you've got no operating system supporting you with anything. And that was pretty typical. That was something that that was like magic to me. At that point as a kid, working in Apple Basic. And like I said, I had some sense of how it was being done in the commercial games, but I was really never as a kid able to figure out 6502 assembly language. 6502 is the processor in the Apple II. A lot of it came down to just, there were no classes. There weren't even really any good books that I had access to. I remember finding one book on 6502 assembly language that was basically positioned at the intermediate level. And I tried reading it and I kind of understood a little bit of it, but I couldn't actually figure out how to actually write an assembly language program in the Apple II because I was missing a couple foundational concepts about the environment. You have to get into the right environment in order to write that kind of code. And you need some specialized software called an assembler and, stuff like that I just had no concept of at the time because, I was learning programming from the ground up. And an intermediate book doesn't, tell you that stuff. It assumes you already know that stuff and, just starts, hitting you with other information. So I was never able to really break through into the assembly language world as a kid. And as a result, was never able to write the kind of game that I wanted to make. What I was able to do, though, is figure out the logic of how a tile graphics engine worked. Because I spent countless hours playing Ultima. 3, 4, and 5 were the Ultimas that were originally released on the Apple II and then ported to other platforms. As of Ultima 6, the primary platform became the IBM compatible PC. But I spent countless hours playing those early Ultimas, and both having fun playing them for games, but then also, I was always thinking about the logic of what was going on. And I eventually in my head pieced together the logic of how to write a game engine that would have these unique graphical tile shapes stored somewhere, and be able to basically draw them at any position on the grid, a tile grid on the screen, and have a map that contained codes that represent those tiles that would sort of get read by the program that then calls the routines to draw the shapes. And I just started piecing this together in my mind of how to write a dynamic engine to be able to do that. And it didn't work because there wasn't enough memory reserved for AppleSoft. The program was too big. And I basically just kind of got a beep, syntax error, overflow error, something like that. So I didn't really get to find out if the logic worked. But then after my dad bought that 386 IBM compatible PC, I took another crack at it, and this time having, this was like a 33 megahertz, 4 mega RAM, system, hugely more capacity than the Apple II. And I got out, I got a book on Microsoft QBasic, which seemed to be the main basic of the platform. And, it wasn't that much different than AppleSoft. Dove in, and I wrote this game engine that I had in my head for a tile graphics engine again, with this time throwing, basically brute forcing the issue on the resource side, and found that it worked. The logic fundamentally worked, and I had a map on the screen like Ultima that would move, that would scroll, I should say, as you press the movement keys. It's still rendered too slow, even with the extra horsepower of the 386 versus the Apple II. It was still too slow for an actual, gaming experience. And ultimately the reason was that, basic is just so inefficient compared to assembly language that, this really drilled it home for me, seeing, basically a 386, 33 megahertz PC get spanked by a 1 megahertz Apple II, running assembly language. Was like, okay, wow, I really get how powerful, assembly is now when you get that close to the metal.
So obviously you mentioned there wasn't really any education in any of that, and it was all very self-taught and stuff. Was there any sort of user groups in your area back in the day, or, any other friends who were into programming on the Apple II?
There were no user groups, or at least none that I was aware of. Certainly, I had kind of a circle of friends that, were into computers and games and things like that. But I really was the most knowledgeable of the group when it came to programming. It's so that, I tended to get questions and answer them, and I didn't really have anyone to go to that knew more than I did. The closest to that was, as I was talking to my dad about some of these things and trying to figure out, how to learn assembly language and some of this more advanced stuff. I do recall that, he suggested some people that that he knew, adults that were involved in the computer industry and were programmers even, and I should maybe ask them, and I did. And basically, they were involved in mainframe programming, and it was some assembly language mainframe programming. So on one hand, I wasn't that far from the mark, but ultimately, I didn't know the right questions to ask. So I didn't really get much from those conversations as far as filling in the gaps that I needed to fill in. By asking the very vague questions that I did, I kind of got answers that were more along the lines of, yeah, I'm not sure how it works on the Apple II. So, but I tried.
I know in your book you talk about playing games with your friend Mike when you were a kid. I mean, is that a strong childhood memory?
Oh, absolutely. We were playing games from as early as either of us can remember all the way into high school. And I think probably the one that stands out the most to both of us is when we were playing Ultima 5. We lived in different cities at that point, maybe 20-minute car ride away, so we'd still see each other periodically, but we'd like be daily playing Ultima 5 and would talk on the phone while doing it. And so we would tie up our parents' phone lines for just hours and hours at a time playing this game. And that was a lot of fun. Those were the days.
What were your earliest memories of going online and connecting with other users? Was that mind blowing? Did that feel like the future at the time?
It was a whole new world, and it was one that really captured my attention away from programming. When I did that tile engine on the 386 PC and saw that the logic worked, but it was still too slow to be practical for an actual gaming experience, I didn't really know where to go from there with programming. So I really kind of just sort of set it down for a while, and then one day my dad brought home a modem, and a whole new world opened up. I was calling bulletin board systems, and eventually decided I wanted to run a bulletin board system, and launched one called the Data Exchange, and then eventually added internet access to the bulletin board system that I was running. And I remember the moment when I was trying to get internet access to integrate into my bulletin board system, which at this point, what was happening in a context of I had never seen the internet anywhere, because this is like 1994. So it only existed in pretty much universities and government institutions at that point. But I managed to get an internet connection from one of the first commercial internet providers that popped up in the area, and was going to integrate it into my bulletin board system. But I'd never actually seen the internet at this point. I remember having a web browser open and probably Netscape or something like that. And at the bottom, like in the lower left, at least at that point, that's where the web browsers would kind of report the connection status. And when there's no internet connection, it would just say something like looking up something or other.com, whatever address that you would put in, it would just like hang there. So that's what I would see as I was fiddling with the configuration and testing it. And I'd see that, okay, that doesn't look right. Fiddle with the configuration, test it. Nope, still doesn't look right. It's just hanging at this looking up thing. And then after the nth round of fiddling, I remember the moment where I go back to the browser, and all of a sudden that status message, it started changing. It started getting active. It's like connecting to this, downloading that. It was giving, like a X number of kilobits per second. And then I start to see very gradually, because this is a slow modem, a graphical screen start to paint in the web browser. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And, at this point, this wasn't so much the user side of it, but just the idea of the kind of content that was able to be accessed was just blowing me away. Because at that point, the only comparable I had was dialing up over a modem to a bulletin board system, which had, ANSI graphics. I believe it was called ANSI. So like text characters used to create, some kind of, graphical like shape and experience. And even the early, internet web browser accessible graphics in 1994 were light years ahead of where BBS ANSI graphics were. So that's probably the thing I remember the most.
Well, Mark, obviously here, we kind of feel like, the Apple II is a bit of a distant memory for you now. You're running, your own successful business. Let's skip forward a bit then to, you kind of touched on it before, in the mid-2010s then, I know around 2014, you rediscovered the world of the Apple II. How did that happen then? How did you fall back into it?
Yeah, so basically I moved. I moved somewhere that I had more space. And one of the things that had been kind of in the back of my mind, I guess, probably for a while, was the idea that, well, it would be fun to buy an old Apple II on eBay and play some old games, but I didn't have room for it. And then when I moved in 2014, suddenly it was like, oh, well, that was one of the benefits to me of moving to this particular place. Like, oh, I'll have room for an Apple II. So I followed through on that, bought the Apple II on eBay and played Ultima and Castle Wolfenstein and a bunch of other old games, and called up Mike Reimer, my friend from the past, and he joined in on the fun as well, and we had a great time with that, and that was the very first stage of getting back into it. Was just doing that, and eventually that led, that basically woke up the all of the other stuff from the past too, about making games and where I left off with Apple II programming and etc.
Well, when you jump back into the Apple II then, I mean, did you find much of an active community online, of users still interested in the system? And was that surprising to see that so many people were still into it and making things for it?
Well, at first, I didn't really know that anybody was still into it. I just bought this Apple II on eBay, and for all I knew, people were selling them, and, museums were buying them, and then me, I didn't really have any sense of, like, okay, they're like other people that are really, doing this. And so that really remained the case when I started writing Nox Archaist, and got together with Mike on it. I mean, we really didn't know if anybody was going to play it. This was just going to be a thing that, that we did. And then a few months go by, and in the process of doing research for various things related to the game development, I discovered, oh, hey, there's Apple II forums that people post messages in. There's people still talking about this stuff, and yeah, it was kind of stunning, because I didn't, had no idea, and at that point, Mike and I kind of look at each other, and we're like, there might be tens of people who actually play our game. We were so excited. And, and at that point, the vision of what we were going to do was pretty small, as far as, we were just going to write some free thing and, have fun with, a couple dozen people. We had no idea that where it was going to end up would be a game that sold over 4,000 copies, that was endorsed by the likes of Steve Wozniak and Richard Garriott. I mean, if you had told us that at the beginning, we would have been like, what? What are you talking about? There's no way that could possibly happen. So, yeah, it was definitely a process, especially early on, of, just mind-blowing, exceeding of expectations as far as what was going on out there. I mean, it didn't take long. And seeing how many people were interested. And I was like, wow, if I had any idea that there was this much interest that was still there, which is, of course, microscopic compared to the audience for modern games, but nonetheless, if I had any idea of the amount of interest that was still there in the Apple II and other 8-bit computers, I probably would have, done a project like this 10 years ago. I mean, yeah, occasionally I thought a little bit about, games and writing games, things like that. But, I just assumed that everybody had moved on, and, there would be, no point in making something like that unless I was just going to do it for myself. And even though in the end that happened, it took a long time, and getting an Apple II just to play games for that kind of nostalgia to kick in. So yeah, it was definitely a shock to find.
So tell us about the game. What's the story behind the game, and how did you pitch it to Mike? And how did he get involved? Well,
the story really developed over time. The philosophy that we took was to build the game engine first, make it as robust as possible, and then tell the best story that we could using that game engine. And that is a game design philosophy coined by none other than Richard Garriott, which at that time I had just read about. That was before I ever talked to him, and thought, this makes a lot of sense. Let's do that. So we focused on the game engine, and then eventually, when it came to writing the story, I just had a pile of notes of ideas that I had written down over the course of time. That it's basically somehow kind of had to get mashed into a comprehensible story. And doing that, a big tool in doing that was reading a book on how to write screenplays. And that was something recommended to me by one of the project advisors that I recruited at one point, Beth Daggert. She was in the gaming industry from the 90s to the 2000s, and worked for companies like Lucas Gaming, worked on the Star Wars games, and really had an awesome gaming career. And so she was gracious enough to provide a lot of advice along the way, and suggested when it came to the story to read this book on writing screenplays, because even though the medium is different, there's a lot of very similar concepts as far as story beats and whatnot that are similar. And so I did that. I read that book, and then basically kind of went back to the pile of notes and trimmed away, probably 90% of what was in the notes to focus in on, the 10% that would fit, kind of the classical construction of a story as explained by this, this book on screenplays. And then from there, translating that back to quest objectives and items and things like that. That was a whole process. And before really diving into creating a significant amount of content of the game, beyond basically just kind of like a demo, to test out all the different game engine features. I mean, I had a roadmap of the story and the quests and the key items and things like that, so that the creating the content became largely a shovel-ready project at that point, rather than sort of a floundering adventure of not knowing where exactly I'm going and redoing things and just that kind of situation, which is exactly where I was afraid I was going to end up, and because of that, very much embraced the guidance from Beth and creating all that structure to be able to guide the way.
Well, the name's interesting as well. Nox Archaist. Where did the name come from?
Well, the name is something that Mike and I brainstormed very early on. We didn't name the project until we announced it publicly, which was about 6 months after the start. And once we announced it publicly, we're like, okay, now it needs a name. And we essentially just brainstormed a bunch of interesting sounding words. And it was really more Mike than me coming up with the words. He's really good at coming up with different kind of words that relate to a concept. And, he traces them into, Norse origins and various, mythological origins, and getting Latin involved. And he's got a kind of a method to it that I don't fully grasp, but it's like whenever I would need a name for something in the game, like, okay, there's going to be a Death Knight boss. Can you come up with, some names? And he'd ask some questions about, the character, and then just come up with this list of stuff. And I still don't know exactly how he does it, but with the game name, so he comes up with one of these lists of interesting sounding words, and the word Nox and Archaist were just names on this list. I think we picked out Archaist first, but it was like a process of elimination. There was a point where we had it down to, I don't know, like 5 of them, and eventually whittled it down to just like Archaist, because, well, that's the study of old things is what it essentially means. And we're like, well, okay, well, that sounds very flexible in the context of, making a sword and sorcery role-playing game. There's going to be some old stuff involved. There's going to be wizards involved. Okay, we can work with that. And then Nox, the Latin word for night or dark, it's like, okay, so we've got, dark and old things, and all right, yeah, that pretty much any story we can come up with can somehow fit with that in some way. So that's how we came up with the name. And actually in the book that we just released, Making Nox Archaist, it actually talks in detail about that process and includes the text messages in like an appendix that Mike and I were sending back and forth when coming up with the name. And but that's how we came up with it. And then of course eventually we had to decide, like, okay, well, what is Nox Archaist? Is that the name of the final boss? Is that the name of the cult? There was a cult involved in the game that was a big protagonist, or is it something else entirely?
What were the biggest challenges you faced when you were programming the game?
Well, there were a lot of challenges with the, if we're talking the project as a whole, there's a lot of challenges, programming only being one of them, but specifically within programming, I think probably the biggest challenge was, there's two that come to mind. One was dealing with intermittent bugs, and the other was getting the game to be stable on floppy disk. Early on in the project, we ended up deciding to write some custom code for accessing the floppy drive that was going to make it a whole lot faster. This is like writing our own disk controller would be the term. And there was a disk controller that was written by Steve Wozniak in 1979. That was what was used in the games in the 80s. And a teammate joined us named Peter Ferry, also known as Cucumba, who had the capability to write a disk controller that was optimized to run something like 7 or 8 times as fast as the one that was used in the 80s, as well as do some other really cool stuff. And Peter's a grandmaster assembly language programmer, so was able to essentially look at what Woz did and make it better, and which is just an astounding thing on its face. And so we went ahead and integrated that into the game, and by having new disk controller code, we had to test it, and we tested it on hard drive, we tested it on floppy, and it took a long time, but we eventually got it working on both, or so we thought. And it turned out that there were some lurking problems with the floppy support that weren't detectable initially because they would only happen after a couple hours of gameplay. We didn't have a couple hours of gameplay for a long time because we were focusing on building the engine and building a demo, and then when it came time to write the content kind of got written in one long sprint, and so we really didn't have enough of the game done before we got to really a late testing period to have been able to discover that there were still some remaining issues, which in part had to do with there was a bunch of different models of floppy drives back in the day, and it required some different kind of timing mechanics to properly access the drive for various different models, and that really threw things off, because the kind of code we're talking about here, this is code that is literally telling the drive arm in the floppy drive to move along the surface of the disk and where to stop and when to start reading and when to start writing.
Really low level.
Really low level. So timing is key for, you tell that drive arm to start move, you got to have your code go run in a delay loop, knowing how fast the drive arm physically moves, so that you don't start having your code reading bytes off of the drive head until the arm is in the correct place, or otherwise you're just going to get garbage. It will fail silently, at that point by giving you garbage. And these slight timing differences between the different drive models had to be taken into consideration. And so this was the kind of sensitivity that was going on. And we basically worked through a lot of that, but then we find out in this late stage that, there's still some issues. And, at this point, we had a target date for release that was, maybe like 4 months away, something like that. We had turned up 2 groups of beta testers that were actively going at the game, working out bugs and things like that. And they were on the hard drive version of the game. Behind the scenes, managing the beta tester group, but behind the scenes, I'm working with Peter on these late stage floppy issues that were coming up, and working on a fix for that. And we were up against our shipment date, and still didn't have a full resolution on them, in part because, each fix that, he came up with, that had to be tested, and that took time. And so we ended up ultimately doing like a split release of the game, where we'd had a Kickstarter somewhere in this whole process, and so for people who backed the Kickstarter and had pre-ordered the game, we said for digital, it was easy because we could release an update, but for those that had basically backed for the physical box set, which came with physical 5 1/4-inch floppy disks, we said, okay, we gave them two options. We said, well, we can ship them to you now, knowing that the floppy version has issues and it's a beta. And if you're comfortable down the road downloading disk images and transferring them to the floppies, you can do that. Or option number 2 is basically wait on to receive shipment of the box sets until we have this figured out. And, that could be months, it could be years. We really don't know, because these were really, really, really nasty issues. And so people made their decisions on that. There were some, kind of in each group. And, and in the meantime, I'm working with Peter on reporting to him the results of the testing, and he's making more tweaks and things like that. We were making some progress, and I had recruited a special group of floppy testers that included Lane Roth of id Software fame. He volunteered to help when we heard we were having some issues, and he had experience, writing code on the metal on the Apple II back in the day. So exactly the kind of eyes we wanted to have on, looking at, when there were problems, look at what floppy plates were doing and other diagnostics and things like that. And so we really had a good team working on this, and, felt like we were making progress. And then the absolute nightmare scenario happened where a couple of the testers, they had repaired some floppy drives that were that they had in their collection that were dead, and they repaired them because they had those skills, and they would run every piece of Apple II software that they had without any problems except for Nox Archaist. It would crash running Nox Archaist, and this was like the last remaining, what seemed to be the last remaining problems for trying to figure, okay, well, why are these crashes happening? And one of the folks that did this, these are really knowledgeable hardware guys, gets out an oscilloscope, and he hooks up an oscilloscope and looks at the wave patterns and is able to determine that the floppy drive is only mostly good. It's got some, some of the waves are out of the specifications for the floppy drives, and that's not right. But it doesn't cause problems with any Apple II software except Nox Archaist. And Nox Archaist, in a lot of ways, we were trying to really push the hardware to its limits, pick up where the 80s developers left off, stand on their shoulders and try to see, well, how much further can we go? And the floppy controller code was an example of that. And so we saw a situation emerge of like, okay, these drives that are only mostly good are good enough for the way code was written in the 80s, but is not good enough when it's pushed, just a little bit further, and then a crops of problems. And this included like disk utilities like Locksmith and, Copy 2 Plus, that would like run a check on the drive and the disk were reporting, hey, everything's fine. Well, and those were written to 80 specifications. But what I was seeing was this nightmare scenario emerge, like, okay, so we theoretically have within the entire population of floppy drives that are out there amongst, Apple II computer users, which there's thousands of people that are still doing stuff with Apple IIs and have physical drives. That amongst that population, there's some percentage of them which hypothetically are these drives that are only mostly good, and therefore are going to have a problem with Nox Archaist, but not with anything else, including utility programs to run these checks. And the people that have them, therefore, they're not even going to know that they have them. They're just going to get Nox Archaist and it's going to crash. So And I'm thinking like, okay, so how do we get ourselves out of this one? Especially in a context of, it's not like we can just say, sorry, can't do floppy support, because we had accepted tens of thousands of dollars of money from Kickstarter and pre-orders and things at this point. And, basically saw, a reputation going up in smoke, in the process. And, at this point, what ended up happening was, some time went by. There were a lot of activities that were going on, and that I was, focusing on. And this was just this was the biggest problem, but it wasn't the only issue. And some time kind of percolated. And what I was noticing was that the floppy tester group, the only people that were reporting this problem were the two people that had rebuilt drives, taken drives that were completely bad and fixed them into, the state that was, now, mostly good. There was nobody else that was reporting a problem like this. And again, the theory being, the nightmare scenario was based on a theory that there is a amount of mostly good drives out there. And, we had maybe a couple dozen people in this group. And I'm thinking like, well, this isn't a huge data sample, but nobody else reported. I wonder if this mostly good state was a state that was the result of and no criticism intended to the wonderful, testers that were working on this, but was maybe this mostly good state the result of essentially a faulty repair job essentially that you could only get maybe a mostly good drive if you started with a bad drive and tried to fix it and didn't quite get it fixed all the way. And it may have, and I thought, and it may also have nothing to do with the techniques that people were using. It may just be that some of the components on the drive itself were beyond, repair, and that weren't obvious or something. But I thought maybe it has something to do with that rather than with, sort of the average floppy drive that from the 80s that has survived that still works. And that was kind of the theory that I started to develop, and really ended up having to take a leap of faith at one point, because there was really no way to test the theory. We could only, practically get the testing, there's no way to get the testing group large enough to really statistically be able to prove or disprove the theory. And at one point, I basically just decided, I think this is quite likely what's going on. And absent any better, theories or options, which there weren't, I made the call. We're going to bank on this. We're going to go for it. And what at that point was the final beta of the floppy version, we decided that to promote that to production. And we put that on all the floppy disks that went out to all the backers who had said, wait to send me the game and, the physical copy of the game until it's all done. We went for it. We sent it all out and hoped. and
Crossed everything.
And as it turned out, we ended up, the number of bugs that got reported on the game at all were very few. And the number of bugs that were reported on floppy disk were basically zero. And I think I described this in the book as something like, in some ways, programming a game like this on the Apple II is like playing a game of poker, and this 40-year-old hardware, tried a massive bluff on us, and in the end we called the bluff and won.
Well, it sounds like you had a really good team, advising you and working with you on this, Mark. I mean, obviously with, Ultima being such an inspiration, I've got to ask about Richard Garriott then. I mean, how did you reach out to him and what advice did he give you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the, over the course of the project, I'm an avid networker. I've done that a lot in my professional career, which is actually in business and finance, not in IT, ironically. And I've had some formal training, networking, and things like that. So it's something that I always have an eye towards. And throughout the project, I always kind of, was anxious to meet people and, took note of other people that they knew and things like that. And so when we were ready to launch our second Kickstarter campaign, and I was hoping to get permission from Richard to be able to have Lord British appear in the game. I knew exactly who to ask for an introduction, and one of my teammates, Jared Califf, who is quite known in the retro community himself, was able to help me out with that. And Richard graciously gave permission to include Lord British, and we've had a number of conversations since then, various things, oftentimes relating to players' attempts to kill Lord British in the game. We've had some fun chats about that, and I sent him the Discord printout's probably the wrong word. With the first attempt that happened in beta testing, somebody tried to kill Lord British and even hacked the game, to try to do so, which of course would make it illegitimate, even if he succeeded. But even with hacking the game, was not able to kill Lord British, but he was like posting in the Nox Archaist Discord play by play of everything that he was doing, and so I sent that over to Richard, and he got a good laugh out of that. And then in December, for the 1 year anniversary, realized that, oh, hey, wow, the game's been out a year, and nobody has successfully killed Lord British for an entire year, which is a first for every other game that Lord British appears in. There's always been a way that people have figured out to be able to do it, and to go a year without that, that's remarkable. So reached out to Richard and pitched him the ideas like, well, hey, what if we made a T-shirt that said Lord British undefeated, with like a blown up version of the Nox Archaist pixel art of Lord British, and then some Nox Archaist branding on the back or something, and to make it kind of like a joint thing. And he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And so we did that, and I sent him one, so you might see him sometime. He's running around occasionally with his Nox Archaist Lord British undefeated T-shirt.
Brilliant. And how did you get your endorsement by Steve Wozniak? And what did he think of a new game coming out on the Apple II?
Yeah. So that's was definitely thrilled for that to happen. I mean, getting an Apple II game endorsed by Steve Wozniak, of course, is like getting an endorsement from the Pope, pretty much. That was just like incredible for us to have that happen, and that came about as well as a result of networking, and this was a third degree networking feat. I remembered that one of the Kansas fests that I had been to, and that is an Apple II computer convention held every year that in Kansas City, Missouri, and it's been going on since the 80s, and they got the name Kansas Fest as a result. And so, but since the 80s, this has been going on, including to present day. And I remember that in I think it was 2019 or 2018, one of those last years it was held in person before COVID, that Roger Wagner was the keynote speaker. And Roger was a avid columnist in the Soft Talk magazine, one of the publications of the day. He wrote a column called Assembly Lines, and he was the developer of the assembler Merlin, created software in the Mac HyperCard. He's done some pretty awesome stuff. And so he came as a keynote speaker that year. And I remember him showing in his slideshow some pictures of him, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, and a couple other the early Apple employees and early computer folks from back in the day, like on some beach somewhere. They were pretty good friends. I pitched to Chris the idea of him asking Roger to ask Steve Wozniak if he'd be willing to talk to us, so then we could pitch him on appearing as an NPC in the game. And so that all just kind of went click, click, click. Chris was like, sure. Roger was like, sure. And Steve Wozniak was like, yeah, absolutely. It couldn't have gone better. And so we got permission to put him in the game. And then even get him to tweet out something about his appearance in the game. It was something like, there's I appear as an NPC game. I appear as an NPC in a new game for the Apple II computer that I invented 40 years ago called Nox Archaist or something like that. I'm like riding my exercise bike in the afternoon, taking a break from, all the game release chaos and drama that's going on Discord and every other media channel. And all of a sudden my phone like starts exploding with, notifications, from Twitter. And I'm like, what? That's okay. What's going on here? And then I'm getting like this bomb of text messages. I hear those alerts going off, and then it's ringing, and I'm like, okay, I gotta pick up the phone. And while it's Chris calling me, he's like, look at your email. So I'm like, okay, and I'm still riding the bike at this point, and because I'm trying to get that done so I can get back to managing stuff with the game launch. Open the email. Click the link that Chris sent me on Twitter and see the tweet from Steve Wozniak, endorsing Nox Archaist. And I just about fell off the exercise bike when that happened.
Well, I mean, obviously you can't get much of a bigger endorsement than was supporting an Apple II game, so that's incredible. I mean, Mark, if people want to read more about him, and you have got a book out as well, the making of Nox Archaist, and I'll link up your website, 6502workshop.com. People can get the physical editions of the game there as well, and that's available on Steam and modern platforms too. But if people want to get the Apple II version, you can get the physical releases from there as well. So I'll put that all of that in our show notes as well. Just before we wrap up, I mean, are there any plans to do anything more on the Apple II then? Do you think you'll do another game at some point?
Yeah, I think it's likely. The timing is a little bit unknown at this point, but I think there will likely be an expansion pack for the original Nox Archaist game. There will likely at some point be a sequel written on the Apple II, but also playable on modern platforms like Steam and Good Old Games. And there may even be a remastered version of Nox Archaist at some point that has more modern, still, kind of top-down 2D tile, but more modern graphics, more modern sound and music, probably most support auto mappers, quality of life stuff like that. That's also, I think, another likely project. And coincidentally, to be able to help, dedicate the time to get some of this going, I'm likely going to be launching a Patreon in the next couple of months as well.
Wonderful. Well, 6502workshop.com, obviously all your social links and everything on there as well, if people want to keep up to date with where you're at with it. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Mark, and well done for you and the team. Keeping the Apple II scene alive. It's always nice to hear people making new projects for classic systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun talking to you guys.